Welcome to SIM-PAC Live. I'm your host, Jeff Matthews, and today we're going to talk to Peter Clifford from Paradigm Fuels. Welcome, Peter.
Well, thank you, Jeff, and a big hello to those who are watching.
Thank you for coming on the show. To help prepare for this interview, I started with a blank sheet of paper and wrote on the top, what is it? And I'd like now to share this. Once we've done that, then we'll be able to dive deeper into the science of this incredible system without losing me or hopefully the other non-scientists like me in the audience. Firstly, the headline, what is it that you do? To me, you're farming energy and CO2 with no waste and almost 100% circularity. In fact, the system might be close to achieving autocatalytic closure. And to make sense of that, you need to both follow the energy created entirely from sunlight and the CO2 pulled from the atmosphere. Here's my layperson's flowchart. This sunshine plus atmospheric CO2 is used in photosynthesis to grow sweet sorghum, a cereal crop. This crop, well actually 3 crops per year, is the principal feedstock to fuel the second farm, an algae farm. But the sorghum is also used to power the system via methane and to make SAF, ethylene or HDPE. The algae farm's only inputs are byproducts from the sorghum to the SAF process, sunshine, and what's returned to the system in circularity from the algae farm. The system is self-sustaining. The output of the algae farm is principally used to make renewable diesel. It does produce oxygen and algae protein as well as additional value streams, as well as digest it, which is returned to the soil as a fertilizer and sequestered carbon. So in summary, all primary energy is provided through photosynthesis. All carbon is initially farmed naturally from the atmospheric CO2 via the natural photosynthesis process and is completely retained in the system until it is utilised by algae growth. The first farm produces feedstock for SAF, ethylene, HDPE. The first farm also creates methane to provide electricity to power the algae farm. And all processing and refining. There is no waste with 100% of the byproducts from the sorghum, including all of the CO2 being returned to the system as feedstock for the algae farm. 33% of the atmospheric carbon is sequestered back into the soil. 66% of the atmospheric carbon farmed is released when the renewable diesel or SAF is burnt. So it is a carbon negative process. All outputs are used circularly within the system, with the exception of 4 value streams produced: SAF, or ethylene, or HDPE, renewable diesel, oxygen, and algae protein. So the system is 100% circular with zero waste. Now, I've gone on record as saying nothing is truly circular except for possibly subsistence farming. But this is as close to anything I've seen. And as I said earlier, it's close to achieving autocatalytic closure. So Peter, I usually don't do such a long introduction, but I hope I've captured in my layman's terms what the system is about.
Well, first of all, let me say that was an excellent introduction, Jeff. And I was really enjoying that.
Thank you very much, Peter. I'm feeling quite pleased with myself. Now that we've got our head around that, the volumes produced 33 million litres of SAF and 36 million litres of renewable diesel from just 2,300 hectare sorghum and a 750 hectare algae farm are mind-blowing. And to understand how you get to those numbers, this is where you can tell us in more detail about your system, particularly your 3 patented pieces of technology, which are really the game changers here. Why don't you, just so we can follow a flow, why don't you take us through the process in a linear fashion, and let's stop at the interesting bits, because some of this is off-the-shelf technology that already exists, and we can just whip through that to get to the interesting bit, which is your IP and your patented IP, which really allows this whole system to hum, because it's the multiplication of the energy that you've got in the system that really makes this compelling. I'll put up a diagram so the audience can follow us.
Basically, we have 2 process trains. One back ends the other. This picture that you've got there is the current generation ethanol system used by other SAF producers and from which we can produce sustainable aviation fuel. This flowchart is not new and has been utilised elsewhere, but there are aspects of which we have patent. For example, the generation of nitric acid required for pH control, the carriage of ammonium nitrate fertiliser through the ethanol process, the use of nitric acid as a nitrate fertiliser, who would have thought, which we would use to directly fertilise the algae system.
And sorry, just to interrupt, all of these products, there's nitric acid and things, this is generated from the system internally, that it's not imported as an additional feedstock. It's part of what comes out of the system. You're utilising every bit.
It's a natural byproduct of what we're doing, but we're using technology to produce that nitric acid. It's no secret because it's there in our patents that we generate nitric acid using corona discharge, and but I'll describe that later. So yes, you're right, Jeff. The thing about this slide is that if we remove the algae system, which is in the bottom left-hand corner of that slide, what we'd have is all this carbon dioxide generated by fermentation, the power generation, the anaerobic digestion, going directly into the air and being lost. No circularity.
Not only being lost, is causing the process to be carbon neutral at best.
Well, yes, and you can still justify carbon neutrality on SAF, even though you dump all this carbon dioxide into the air. So roughly our 2,300 hectare model, which we'll be talking about, produces about 270,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide. We use every bit of it to grow algae, every bit of it, and to produce a number of products. For example, liquid oil, which we process into renewable diesel, digest it, which we bury as a carbon farming exercise, according to the Act, carbon dioxide, which is returned to the algae system, circularity, methane, which is used in power generation, and ammonia that is used for fertiliser. So to explain this diagram, in the first instance, we've got the forage harvesting of sorghum crop. Now we're producing, in an irrigated system, we can do 3 crops a year, and that's producing about 240 tonnes of crop. Now, a sugarcane farm would produce about 95 tonnes. So we're roughly 2.5 times the amount of biomass that sugarcane would produce. And interestingly enough, it's the same Bix level, in other words, the same sugar level as sugarcane. So that, but it's a different sugar, you know, it's a fructose glucose, whereas sugarcane is a sucrose. So then we crush to extract excess moisture. Incidentally, we'd forage harvest this sweet sorghum because that breaks up the sweet sorghum ready for crushing. And we crush to remove unwanted juices to enable the pulverization into 1 or 2 millimetre flakes. So that readies the biomass for what we then call our saccharification system. But we put that biomass, firstly we pre-treat it. Pre-treatment breaks up the lignins from the cellulose. So we can expose the cellulose. So once you expose the hemicellulose and glucose, we can then process those with enzymes in the saccharification to produce all this glucose. In fact, we get roughly about 6 times more glucose out of the, through this enzymic treatment than we would get out of the juice, which has typically been used in sugarcane ethanol production. The juice is then fermented and so they produce the ethanol. And so we get 6 times as much.
And of course we all know that glucose is just another form of energy that we ultimately will fuel the renewable diesel and things.
Yes.
But this part of the process, you've got some of your own IP around and patents around? Yes,
we have. First of all, when you run all this gas through the pre-treatment, you're running at about a pH of 4.8. Now, that's a little bit too acidic to run these enzymes through, but it works from a production point of view. It quickly breaks the bonds between the lignin and the cellulose. But then we've got to neutralise that nitric acid, and so we neutralise it with ammonia. And the ammonia and the nitric acid form ammonium nitrate, which is a fertiliser. It was used before urea and all those fertilisers came online. But it's a very good fertiliser. But we, because that fertiliser is in the solution that we then process with these enzymes in the saccharification stage, we end up carrying this ammonium nitrate all the way through the system. And that carriage of ammonium nitrate is patented. There's other areas that we've also patented here. There's other ways of pre-treating, but in this particular case, it's expedient for us to produce ammonium nitrate because we've got a crop that we need to service. And the laws of agriculture state that 5% of your biomass, that's your dry biomass, needs to be nitrogen. And
yes.
So but that nitrogen is taken up in the crop through the roots, not from the sky. So that's
yes.
why farmers use legumes to farm legumes to capture nitrogen out of the air and put it into the soil so the crop can use it. But you still need that 5% nitrogen in the soil available. And that's why we fertilise. And that 5% would otherwise, for a system like this where you've grown a high biomass crop, 240 tonnes of crop per hectare per year, that would basically be around about $26 million of urea if we were to fertilise the sorghum crop with urea. So it's very important for us to produce an ammonium nitrate fertiliser.
To put back in the system.
Hence the need for ammonium nitrate. And specifically because on the right-hand side there you see an anaerobic digester. Now, for those who don't understand what an anaerobic digester is, it's digestion in the absence of oxygen. And so there's no oxygen available to the digester in the anaerobic digester. And what it is produced is ammonia, carbon dioxide, but more importantly, methane. And we use that methane in power generation. So that anaerobic digestion, because it's producing ammonia, becomes alkaline. And we also need nitric acid to neutralise that alkalinity. And again, nitric acid and ammonia produces ammonium nitrate. And so with the anaerobic digester, it's a very large volume of mass that we're processing. Gives us an exceptionally large volume of ammonium nitrate, even though it's weak. It's a weak solution, but it's still used to return to the crop as ammonium nitrate in irrigation. So again, we have another ammonium nitrate source in this process. So the juice and this saccharificated biomass is then fermented. And that's standard fermentation. I mean, there's nothing unusual about that. But what we have as a result of that fermentation is about 8.4% ethanol, because we've got so much sugar. We've got a sugar soup that we're fermenting. And we've got end up with 8.4% ethanol. And that soup, though, has got a lot of biomass in it, which we have to filter out. Certainly if we're going to take this to its logical end. But the filtration of the vinaigrette, because the fermentation produces a very dirty beer. So we've got to filter that beer. And the biomass is then returned to the anaerobic digester. And so that's one of our major sources for the anaerobic digester, because there's a lot of lignins that don't get to sapnicated in this process. And so that represents a reasonably large percentage of the crop. So that goes back and is dealt with in anaerobic digestion. But that allows us then to filter this fermentation and then supply. And in that filtration, I should say, we also have reverse osmosis to raise the 8.4% to around about 17 to 19% ethanol. The reason doing that halves the amount of water that we have to process to get the ethanol out. So it's very productive, but you can't go beyond 17 to 19% because the pressures involved in reverse osmosis. These reverse osmosis systems aren't designed to go beyond those sort of pressures. And so then we have this ethanol and ammonium nitrate solution, which we then distill out the ethanol because distillation's around about, I think, boiling point of ethanol is 78 degrees. So, you distill it at 80, 82 degrees. And so you're not boiling any water, which is very energy intensive. But we are able to extract the ethanol. And that will give us around about 94% ethanol, which we can then further pre-treat using reverse, vapor permeation. Vapor permeation to take it to 99%.
And it's worth jumping in here to say that you're creating your own power generation to run the whole plant.
Yes, and that's one of the 5 aspects of our system which make this so efficient. We're using the biomass that is digested in the anaerobic digestion to produce methane, biomethane.
Yeah.
And we run that biomethane through a gas engine, and that will produce 26 megawatts of electrical power. It also produces 17 megawatts of cogen heat. And that 17 megawatts of cogen heat is very important because, we have things like the distillation, as you can see, and the evaporation. And but also we've got to maintain the temperatures in the pre-treatment and saccharification to about 50 degrees centigrade. So you need to supply heat to these solutions for them to operate perfectly. So, yes. But we are using this methane that's extracted out of the anaerobic digestion to produce, again, carbon dioxide. But that carbon dioxide also contains NOx. And we actually run that through our corona discharge system to turn the NOx into nitric acid. So a corona discharge system is 2 electrodes at very high voltages without a current going through them, but sufficient enough that as the gases, the exhaust gases from your engine travel past these electrodes, they ionize. And in the presence of water vapor, the NOx and the water are forced to combine effectively into nitric acid. And so that corona discharge device is very important to our system.
And this corona discharge system, this is yours? This is your proprietary patented system?
Yes, that's right. It's patented. And so the nitric acid that we produce is then a very good fertiliser for the algae system. Provided we keep the pH at around about 5.6, which we can manage, it's a nitrate. And so nitric acid as a fertiliser for our algae system is, thought of that.
Well, yeah. Now we get the centrepiece, the algae farm. And now I've got to ask the question here, Peter, because my understanding about algae is the people who don't want to grow it get to grow it plentiful, and the people who want to grow it can't grow it.
Yes, that's right.
And nobody's really cracked it commercially at scale yet, or at a scale that's cheap enough. And I've got to admit some fascination with your system, and I'll now put up the graphic that you supplied of the farm, and you take us through the flow through this farm, and I love when people look at stuff and they design something with simplicity but genius as well. And take us through that. And
Thank you.
I'll try and put I'll put an arrow on the bits you're talking about.
What you see is a fly-through down a panel. And as we go down that panel, you will see these light diffusion devices, those rectangular things. But they project all the way down to the bottom of this algae system. And what you see over the top is a canopy. In other words, this system is a closed system.
So the reason that you want diffused light all the way to the bottom is algae requires, let's call it a low level of light, but a low level of consistent light. It doesn't like it too bright.
That's right.
And the problem with algae farming is you've got algae with too much light dying and algae with not enough dying. And it's a matter of getting exposure to the maximum amount of algae of a low level of light consistently. That's
right, Jeff, because the sun, we assume that we're growing this in the northern areas in Australia. And up there, the light intensity is around about 1,700 micromoles of photons per square metre per second. But algae, is shown in all the scientific papers, its optimum light intensity is about 150 to 200. And so we're almost 10 times as much light that we need.
Yes.
From the sun. But, raceways and algae ponds, and which don't raise a lot of the medium to the surface, are effectively also deprived of light, because once you get to 1 gram a litre of algae, you can't transmit beyond, say, 7 centimetres of that algae system. And so it's, you're locked into the top 7 centimetres of the surface if you don't use these light diffusion devices. And so these light diffusion devices, which you can see as these rectangular things, they go all the way down to the bottom of this algae system.
I'm sorry, they're about 2 metres deep?
2 metres deep. And they are dimensioned in such a way that they are, if you can see the pink light, or if you can see pink, you can see reflected light. And they are dimensioned to reflect around about 50 micromoles of photons per square metre per second, which has been shown to produce around about 92 milligrams per litre per day of algae. But the fact that we're using 2 metres depth allows us to control our temperatures in the algae system.
Yes.
And so this light is transmitted all the way through the system, but more so than that is that we've got to feed this algae medium, and the way we do that is to run the algae medium from left to right, but the algae medium goes under a blue curtain and into the next panel, but it has to go under a light diffusion device, and then it has to go up over a partition, and over the partition, and then down and underneath the next light diffusion device, and then up and over a partition again, and then down. And so this water is circulating not only from left to right, but up and down.
When you said the canopy and it's a closed system, just so people can follow it, the canopy, it would be slightly positive pressure inside the canopy, and it would be an enhanced CO2 atmosphere, and not toxic. You could still live in it, but you wouldn't be wanting to run miles inside it. And the algae needs to come to the surface to be able to utilise the CO2 to grow.
That's right.
And so it comes, let's call it feeding. It's feeding off CO2. It's also being fed, the entire farm's being fed and powered by the byproducts from the sorghum grass. That whole system.
Yes.
And so it's completely, there's no external power other than the sun, no external CO2 other than what's come off the sorghum grass and the anaerobic digestion stuff. And everything is then fed through the algae farm. So this is the This is the supercharged system of the whole thing. This is what is supercharging the sorghum farming, is in fact the algae farm is able to run completely off the byproducts of that.
Yes, well, see, algae is photosynthesis on steroids. So,
Yes.
The concept of photosynthesis, carbon dioxide plus water, gives you CH2O plus oxygen. And then the CH2O becomes C6H12O6, which is glucose. This is the building block of all your celluloses. So, but our algae system consumes 400 tonnes of carbon dioxide per hectare per year, whereas the sugarcane crop, which grows to 2 metres in a year, consumes about 47 tonnes. So that gives you a comparison of the photosynthesis that we have on steroids, if we can utilise it, and we have utilised it here. And
Sorry, I'll just jump in. I've just got to make a comment, because the people who want to promote DAC, that's direct air capture of carbon,
yes,
to try and take carbon out of the atmosphere, they need to understand how much algae farms can actually absorb.
if it's designed correctly. If it's designed correctly.
It is very impressive. And if any of them could get to that rate, any of those DAC machines could actually get to that rate, because there's a lot of money being spent and there's very little carbon coming out of the atmosphere.
Yeah, that's right. And so just to come back to that, Jeff, what we have here on this picture is a panel, which is embraced by a curtain on either side of the panel. That's that blue structure that you see. So that's a curtain that goes below the water level. And then there's a canopy over the top. So what we have is a closed space. And the gases, which are very high in carbon dioxide, need to go down that panel and then come back to the next panel and then down the next panel. In one of these systems, those gases will travel 1.6 kilometres at 27 metres per hour. So that's not even a breeze, that's not even a breath. And so this carbon dioxide is available to the algae medium. And Henry's law, great law of physics, dictates that the carbon dioxide, the high concentrations of the carbon dioxide in the air will be absorbed by the water, and the high concentrations of oxygen that's generated from photosynthesis will be released into the gases. And so what we end up with is a very high percentage of carbon dioxide, but the whole thing is dimensioned so that pretty much all the carbon dioxide is consumed by the time these gases get to the very end of the path. And then we end up with about 78% of oxygen, being generated, which we capture. So all that carbon dioxide that we deliver is then captured as oxygen, and the carbon is sequestrated into the algae, which we then use for the production of renewable diesel.
One quick question: the algae travelling, the algae moving, what makes it move and go under and over? Is it seeking something?
No, it's slightly downhill, but it's pumped.
It's pumped.
It's pumped from one end, and it's captured at the other end. And so there's a flow, a natural flow of algae medium that will go from one end to the other by virtue of the circularity of the algae medium. Because once it gets to the end, we then process that algae medium and remove all the algae, not all, 80% of the algae.
And keep recirculating the water.
That's right, and we keep recirculating water. So you need a pumping system to recirculate the water to the other end. And in distributing that water, we then are able to keep that flow going.
Let's talk about the fertilisation of the algae.
Yes. Well, that's a very interesting concept. What first of all, it's front-ended with our electroflocculation system. So we've got to remove the algae from the water. And so we have these electrodes, only 40 volts, spanning 2 meters. And the algae medium that we've captured at the end of this marquee is run through this electroflocculation system. So that algae medium is travelling between 2 electrodes, only 40 volts, but it's sufficient because algae itself has what we call a zeta potential, slightly negative, and that ensures that the algae keeps separate. That keeps them, because they're both negatively charged, it ensures that the algae doesn't flocculate naturally. But that same zeta potential is useful for us because it's then attracted to the anode of these 2 electrodes, and that flocculates the algae, and we can then lift that just by flotation and extract that flocculated algae. But in the process of doing this, we need a current that's going between the 40-volt electrodes. And to do that, we add nitric acid, another reason for nitric acid. And so we're running about 4.8, 5.3 pH. And it's so not enough to really disturb the algae, but it's enough to give us conductivity between the electrodes. And so we now have a solution that is a pH 5.3, and that is what we distribute through the algae system. But in blending it with the algae system, we run it up to 6.4 pH, which has a lot of nitric acid in it, which is our fertilizer, but running at 6.4 pH. And so that's how we fertilize our algae system, and at the same time circularly return the water through the system. And that's in our payments.
Brilliant. It's self-fertilising.
Yes.
And look, so some of the other things about this algae farm, just before we get off it, a lot of these things, or in fact all of them, you've designed. It sits, you dig it into the soil. It's a low-cost thing to build. A lot of the plastics you could actually produce out of an end product. That comes out, the HDPE. Yeah.
I'm just going to show you some HDPE.
Yeah, right.
This is tough stuff.
Yeah.
And we actually can produce this from the ethanol. Ethanol becomes ethylene. High density polyethylene is a product of the system. And this is a construction material. And we can construct our own algae growth system and all our ponds and things like that using HDPE.
Yes.
And so I thought I'd just show you. It's solid stuff. I'm not going to bang my head with it because it would hurt. But it's not as tough as steel, but it is solid stuff. And you can dope it if you need to, termite prevention and things like that. So it's very versatile and a good working material.
And your pre-treatment ponds, all the way back to your pre-treatment ponds and your anaerobic digesters, they're made of the same stuff that you've designed.
Yes.
And you could technically produce it. And once you build one of these, you could actually be self-sustaining and construct all the rest of them out of the same material.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct.
It's brilliant. What happens to that algae it comes out? How does it get from algae to renewable diesel? How difficult is that process?
Okay, all right. So we're going to go to another slide, which if we didn't have this process, if we didn't have the algae growth system, all the carbon dioxide that we're producing by the first process, which is the standard SAF process, all that carbon dioxide would be released into the atmosphere, but we're capturing it, all of it, into the algae growth system and producing this algae. Now, the first thing we need to do with this algae is to flocculate it because, it naturally keeps itself apart by the zeta potential. So we need to flocculate it, and that gives us the algae that we can process. We run it through solidification, and that would, what they call leasing the cells. In other words, cutting or slicing open the cells to release the lipid oils that are in the algae. And so we're expecting 30% of the algae to be lipid oil. But it's really effectively a refinery application. We're using hydrogen under high pressure and temperature with your lipid oil to treat and crack the lipids into paraffin oils. And so that's what they do in refineries. They use hydrogen under high pressure and temperature to crack mineral oils into diesel and all the aviation fuels and everything else. So but this is a micro refinery for 2,300 hectares.
Yes.
And it's only about 7% of the size of a standard 100,000 barrel a day refinery, which is a small refinery. So this micro refinery, they can supply them on 4 container skids. And these can be dropped into a farm, and so you can do your own processing of your lipids with the hydrogen that you're producing in electroflocculation to process your lipids into diesel.
The system that you've invented is fantastic, and I love all its circularity. But it's the multiplication of the inputs and everything going back in, which enables you to get just stunning amount of SAF and renewable diesel. And that, I'm assuming, without doing a deep dive into the numbers, because if anybody wants to know about the financial returns on this, which I would imagine are substantial, you don't have to be an expert to understand you've got a small import making a big export output.
Yes.
And they can come and talk to you about that. But this thing would be incredibly profitable, I would assume.
It is. Internal rates of return greater than 50%.
Given that a lot of the system is off the shelf and the other stuff you can construct yourself and from your own designs quite cheaply, there's nothing impossible. It's not going to take forever to build once the cash is there.
No, that's right. And you could start preliminarily just doing a SAF system.
Yeah.
No risk. And the cash flow from that will then take us through to the second train,
Yes.
which is the Algae system. So
Yes.
We could start in steps.
Yes. Well, that's brilliant, Peter. Look, thank you very much. If you want to get in touch with Peter, you can go to the Paradigm Fuels website. I'll put it up on there, but it's www.paradigmfuels.com.au. It's been fascinating. It's been fascinating for me to do a couple of days of serious study and get my head around it. And, good luck with it. And we will obviously keep in touch in the future.
Well,